Do I hear a bid for the girl's indenture? Come, gentlemen, 3 years of service to settle the debt, and a strong, dutiful creature she is. Who will start the bidding?" The Duke of Crestmore stood in the doorway of the crowded assembly hall, and felt something cold and terrible move through him. He had come only to collect a note of hand owed him by the master of this house, a petty squire named Felgate, who held these settling assemblies twice a year, a vulgar spectacle in which the debts of the desperate were called in publicly, before a jeering crowd, and paid off in coin or, when there was no coin, in the labour of whoever the family could least afford to lose. Hugh had heard of such things. He had not believed grown men of fortune would gather in evening dress to gawk at them as at a cockfight. Yet here they were, 100 of them, glittering and idle and cruel, ranged around a raised step at the front of the hall, and upon that step stood a young woman. She was perhaps 23, in a thin grey dress that had been mended carefully and often, her dark hair drawn back plain, and at the hem of her skirt there was a tear freshly made, as though some hand in the crowd had already reached out to paw her on her way up. She held herself very straight. That was the thing Hugh noticed first, and could not afterwards stop noticing, that in the centre of that braying room, with 100 well-fed faces turned up to feast on her shame, she did not weep, and she did not cower, and she did not lower her eyes. She looked out over their heads at the far wall with a still, white, unbroken dignity, as though by sheer will she could be somewhere else, someone else, anywhere but here. Her mother ran up the debt, and the poor taste to die of it, Felgate was saying to laughter, leaving this one to make it good. Now I'm a reasonable man, the sum is £40. 3 years of her service clears it. What am I bid? £10, called a fat man near the front, and I'll not work her too hard, and the room roared. 15, drawled another, looking her over in a way that made Hugh's hand close slowly into a fist at his side. I've a use or two for a girl who holds her chin so high. The young woman's gaze did not waver from the far wall. But Hugh saw her throat move once as she swallowed, and he saw her hands, clasped before her, tighten until the knuckles whitened, and he understood that her stillness was not the absence of fear, but the conquering of it, moment by moment, in front of them all, and that it was costing her everything she had. He did not decide to move. He was simply, suddenly, moving down the side of the hall, through the press of silk and broadcloth, the crowd parting before him as crowds always parted before the Duke of Crestmore, the laughter faltering and dying in patches as men recognized him and fell silent and elbowed their neighbours to do the same. By the time he reached the open space before the step, the hall had gone quiet. "Your Grace," said Felgate, startled, bowing too low, "we are honoured. I had no notion you would attend our little—" "What is the debt?" Hugh's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. £40, Your Grace, but the bidding is for her serve." "I did not ask what you were bidding. I asked the debt." He drew out his pocketbook. £40, you said. "Yes, Your Grace, but—" "Then here are 80. He counted the notes out onto the squire's small table, deliberately, one after another, in the absolute silence of the room. "Double the sum. The debt is paid twice over. There is nothing left to bid upon." He looked up, and let his cold gaze travel slowly around the ring of faces, the fat man, the drawling man, all of them, until not one of them could meet it. "I find I have never in my life been in such poor company. I will not be in it a moment longer than I must." He turned to the young woman on the step. She was staring at him now, the careful composure broken at last into pure bewilderment, her grey eyes wide and uncertain, as though she could not understand what was happening and dared not let herself hope. Up close he could see that she was trembling very slightly, and that there were no tears on her face only because she had refused, with everything in her, to let them fall. "Madam," Hugh said, and his voice was wholly different now, low and gentle, pitched for her alone. "Forgive me that I did not come sooner." He held up his hand to her. She looked at it. She looked at him. And then, slowly, disbelievingly, she laid her cold fingers in his, and he felt how they shook, and he closed his own warm hand around them and held fast. The step was high, and she was unsteady. Hugh did not wait to see whether she could manage it. He simply lifted her down, and then, because her knees buckled when her feet touched the floor, and because he would not for the world have let her crumple before these people, he gathered her up into his arms entirely, one arm beneath her shoulders and one beneath her knees, as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Put your arm about my neck," he murmured. "I have you. No one here will touch you again." She obeyed, her face turning instinctively against his shoulder, hiding at last from the 100 staring eyes, and he felt a shudder go through her that might have been the beginning of the tears she had held back so long. And the Duke of Crestmore carried her out. He carried her the length of that silent, gaping hall, past the drawling man and the fat man, and the squire still gawking at his table of doubled money, past every glittering fool who had come to feast on her ruin, and not one of them said a word, and not one of them dared. He carried her through the great doors and down the steps into the cold, clean night, away from the candlelight and the cruelty, and he did not set her down until they had reached his waiting carriage, and even then he kept his arm about her, steadying her, shielding her with the bulk of his own body from the doorway and the eyes within. "There," he said quietly, "it is over. It is finished. You are safe." She lifted her face from his shoulder. The tears had come now, silently, sliding down without any sound at all, and she made no move to hide them, only looked up at him with an expression he would remember to the end of his days, not gratitude, exactly, though that was in it, but a kind of stunned, dawning wonder, as though she had braced for the whole world to be cruel and one corner of it had, impossibly, turned kind. "Why?" she whispered. "You do not know me. Why would you?" "Because you would not bow to them," he said simply. "I watched you stand on that step with 100 jackals at your feet, and you would not give them so much as one tear, and I thought I had never seen anything braver in my life. Such courage is not bought and sold in a room like that one. It should never have been near it." He drew off his own great coat and settled it about her thin shoulders. "What is your name?" "Mercy," she said. "Mercy Hollis." "Mercy." He helped her up into the carriage and climbed in after her and rapped for the driver to go. "You will come to Crestmore. You will be a guest there, an honored one, for as long as you wish, and you will owe me nothing, not service, not coin, not anything. The debt is gone." "I bought nothing tonight, Mercy. I only ended an outrage." She drew his great coat close around her and was quiet a while, watching him in the swaying carriage light, and at last she said in a low voice, "No one has ever done a kind thing for me without wanting something for it." "Then I shall have to make up for a great many people," said Hugh, "by wanting nothing at all." He kept his word. At Crestmoor, where she was given a warm room and good food and the freedom of the house, and no demand was ever made of her, and slowly, over weeks, over a careful and unhurried season, the white strain went out of her face, and the flinch went out of her shoulders, and the girl who had stood like marble on a cruel step began, by degrees, to bloom. He found her clever and steady and quietly funny once she trusted that her wit would not be punished. He found her endlessly kind to the servants, who adored her, and patient with his own black silences, and possessed of a courage that had nothing to do with that dreadful night, and everything to do with the bone-deep dignity of a soul that had been tested in fire and not broken. He had told her she owed him nothing, and he had meant it, and he held to it even as he came to want, more than he had ever wanted anything, for her to choose to stay. It was Mercy, in the end, who spoke first, for she had grown brave again, and bravest of all with him. They were walking in the long gallery one evening when she stopped and turned to him and said, "You told me, the night you carried me out of that hall, that you wanted nothing of me. I have come to wish, Hugh, that you did. I have come to wish you wanted me to stay." And the Duke of Crestmore, who had faced down 100 sneering men without a flicker, found his voice was not quite steady. "I have wanted it since the moment you would not weep for them," he said. "I have only been afraid that you would think it one more debt. I never wished to be one more man who saved you and then sent you a reckoning." He took her hands, both of them the way he had taken them on the step, but warm now and steady. "Stay, Mercy, not as a guest, not in any debt. Stay as my wife, as my equal, as the bravest soul I have ever known and the dearest. I have rooms full of fine things, and not one of them is worth the sight of you each morning. Let me spend my life making certain the world is never cruel to you again." She was weeping again, but smiling through it now, which was a thing he had waited a long time to see. "You called me priceless once," she said, "in front of all those people, with your doubled money on the table. No one had ever called me anything but a debt to be paid." She lifted his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "Yes, 100 times, yes." They were married within the month, quietly, with no jeering crowd and no glittering fools, only the servants who loved her and the spring coming green over Crestmore's hills. And the Squire Felgate held no more settling assemblies, for the Duke of Crestmore made it coldly and publicly known that any man who turned the ruin of the helpless into an evening's sport would answer to him for it, and one by one those cruel gatherings ended across the county, because a powerful man had decided they would. But Mercy never thought of that hall again, in the long happy years that followed, without thinking also of the doorway, and the tall man who had crossed a room full of cruelty to reach her, and laid his money down, and lifted her up, and carried her out into the clean night as though she were the most precious thing the world had ever made. Which, to the Duke of Crestmore, for all the rest of his days she was.